The second theme that we embarked on was risk transparency. And this sounds really like a motherhood statement, but it is amazing if you were to go back to I speak for our organization, you go back to the risk reporting and you think about it. You've got business leaders who have a different focus all day long. You've got board members who run their own businesses, who have limited time, who have major issues you're dealing with. Yet we as practitioners in risk would dump mountains of information on them with terms like delta and vega and gamma and all the risk terms and VAR and all the risk terms we could sort of think of. Then we'd attach an appendix with a definition of the risk term and say, job done. The truth of the matter is I went around and interviewed board members as to, what was it that we weren't sort of providing to them? And they said, you provide me with binders and binders of information for a board meeting. This is complex, highly technical detail. You expect me to read this somehow on a plane coming back from wherever I'm running my business and to understand what you're telling me. You're not doing your job. Because you need to make this more easy for me to understand, and you need to translate this into less technical terms so I can absorb what it is. And you would be amazed at how many times we use words like VAR that we think everybody understands, and their understanding of it is not what it is. There is a way of doing this. You can't get away from some of the technical jargon. We function in that world. What we started off with was a master design that said, what is the information, the data that you need to build risk reporting? What is the base data you need? And how do you create reporting that you want management, you want practitioners, and you want the board making decision off that same base of data? It is about transforming data into meaningful information for the audience. So it should be the same base of data. It should be that if I'm I'm running risk management for the credit book in P&C, I might need to have more granular detail. If I take that up one notch and say that the P&C leadership, the personal and commercial bank leadership in the organization need to understand the risk they're taking, it may be on that same base data, but it is a different level of information that you're transmitting. And the same way you get it up to the board. So we stop producing mountains and mountains of information. Quite frankly, it is down to synthesize with 2 pages and 3 appendix. No board report has more than 5 pages anymore. And the 2 pages simply focuses on what are the key risks you're dealing with? What are you doing about it? Where are you at in terms of this? How will I know it's completed and what's left to be done? And then you can answer, based on that, you can answer any amount of questions you want. But it is getting it down to that what are the risks? How will I know? Most of the time we spend dealing with the risk that's already on our books, and we lose sight of what is coming down the pipeline. So we used to have these top-line risk report that had the same thing. I mean, you could go back for quarters and quarters and look at it, and it was the same 10 things. It almost felt like you literally took a page from last quarter and you inserted it here. And there wasn't that robust process of dialogue and discussion to surface it. So if you have a whole bunch of risk practitioners looking at the same data quarter after quarter, talking to the same people about it, you get the same thing. We created structures which were forums to have these discussions. So we have what is an emerging risk dinner that John's been to our dinner. John knows nothing about our book. John knows nothing about what we're managing on a day-to-day basis. And the purpose of the dinner isn't for John to tell us what our emerging risk, it's to hear from John what he believes the emerging risk to be. So the same way we have practitioners, we have academics, we have business leaders, and we have our risk folks. And the best, I think from my perspective, the best outcome of these things is to get differing points of view. And you might or might not go away and do something differently, but you're forced to confront whether or not there is something somebody else is seeing that I've not picked up, and you at least are forced to go back and do the research relative to whether or not you want to take a position on it. So things like the Emerging Risk Forum, things like the Trading Products Committee, it's not to engage in discussion about what we know, it's to ask the right questions, and it is to hear alternative points of view. And I think organizations that are willing to have some uncomfortable discussion and hear other points of view probably fare better. I think the polite discussion where you rely on the person that you view as the expert is probably what many of us do, and it's probably what gives us a little bit of a false sense of security, so you don't see what's coming down the pipeline. A fresh set of eyes has never hurt any of us. We've done a lot more in terms of this. Things like, you hear the term risk appetite. Everybody's got a risk appetite statement. Well, when you say how much risk is the right amount of risk to take, and how would you define that in an organization? We did a lot of work around risk appetite and quantifying what is the risk that we're willing to take, both in terms of qualitative and quantitative, and what is the tolerance range that is acceptable, and how will you measure it, how will you communicate it in the organization, how will we know it when we experience it. So I would say more work, I think, at the top of the house and amongst the practitioners and senior people. We've made really good progress around that. I think the next evolution of that is being able to have a risk appetite statement that if I walked into a branch on Bloor Street and I said, okay, what's the risk that you're dealing with? That person there should be able to explain the risk that they're taking within the risk appetite statement in 5 or more bullet points. So that's kind of the next evolution, that we're getting to a common language and making sure that it has enterprise-wide applicability.